at some point on our last full day in London, which was Monday, we did the Tower of London. Has anyone been to the Tower of London? 2, 3. You gotta go, Pam. You gotta go. And if you happen to go with an 11-year-old boy, do you know what they're really going to want to see? The chopping block and the other places of torture, because this was part of royal life from the 1100s through the 1600s when the royals had this as one of their palaces. The first of the palaces of the kings after the Norman invasion of England, and there 3 queens, no less, had been executed, along with countless others of those who had betrayed the crown in some way, shape, or form, whether that was high treason or whether that was the crime of not giving birth to a son when you were supposed to, whatever it was. But we went to those places, and we had this wonderful tour that they operate there from the Beefeaters. The Beefeaters aren't, I had them confused before. It's not the folks in the guard outfit uniform outside the palace. These are the folks that are kind of, he wasn't wearing the ruffled thing around his neck, but sometimes they have the ruffled thing around their neck and the top hat and the formal uniform, but they usually have the insignia of the monarch right there on their chest. And very interesting, this is a highly sought after position. I think this community will appreciate this. Beefeaters, to get the position, have to have served 22 years in the military. And only after that time, and having been a minimum age of 40, so I'm not sure how you could be that minimum age anyway, but at that time, you could then apply to be a Beefeater. And there's only been somewhere on the order of 400 to 500 Beefeaters ever since they've kept the history of these particular people, these personal guards to the monarch. Do you know why they were called Beefeaters? They don't know either. They suspect it was because, as opposed to the rest of the common people, when dinner was done and they were there with the king, because the king wanted nice, strong soldiers around him, he said, "Now you may eat my meat because we're all done with it." And so they got this moniker of Beefeaters. That's probably it. But they're giving us the tour, and they show us the chopping block there, and they tell us about a number of the people that were executed there. One of them being a queen who doesn't have that title. Her name, Lady Jane Grey. Sound familiar to anyone? Maybe, maybe not. If you don't know your royal British history, don't worry. I didn't remember her either till I was there 2 days ago. But Lady Jane Grey was a queen for 9 days. So this was after the death of Henry VIII, and this kind of brings religion into it too, because Henry VIII had famously separated from the Catholic Church, and they don't say formed the Church of England because it was already there, but you jump through a bunch of hoops and you get to, he formed the Church of England because he wanted a divorce. You know, the Episcopalians still get mad if you say that's the only reason Anglicans are around, but it's kind of true. Anyway, after he died, because he had no sons to be heir, there was a question about who was going to be the monarch next, because they hadn't had a queen yet in England. And so the Protestants rallied, and they found a cousin. So this woman, Lady Jane Grey, her mother was the daughter of Henry VIII's father, so they were brother and sister. One of these, and they're all cousins, so you know, she fit the mold, right? She's got royal heritage and lineage in her veins. And so they made her queen very quickly. And she served as queen for 9 days as the Protestants tried to hold on to the throne, until truly the rightful heir really was able to mount a comeback. Her name was Mary, or Mary the First, or otherwise known as?
Mary Queen of Scots.
No.
Mary the Red?
Bloody Mary. Mary the Queen of Scots will get murdered later. But Bloody Mary, as she became to be known, was the daughter of Henry VIII proper with Catherine of Aragon, so she had been raised in Spain and was Catholic. And obviously, the new Protestants of the Church of England did not want to return to Catholicism, but having the righteous claim and I guess the best army behind her, Mary took over. And do you know what she did to Lady Jane Grey?
Chopped her head.
Not at first. At first, Lady Jane Grey was simply locked up in the Tower. And being locked up in the Tower when you were rich wasn't actually that bad. You brought your servants, you brought your family, and you know, you're still of noble blood, so it's not all that bad. But at first, she was simply locked away, and realistically, she wasn't a traitor. She didn't want to be queen. She was 16 or 17 years old, and people had sort of positioned her to make her the queen. And so Mary looked with pity and leniency and even love on her cousin until there was a rebellion. Until there was a rebellion, and of course, the rebels sought to reinstall Lady Jane Grey to the throne. And Mary realized, on her path to becoming Bloody Mary, that so long as Lady Jane Grey lived, this would never stop. And so, off with her head, as they say, and Lady Jane Grey died there at the chopping block at the Tower of London. Now, on the one hand, it seems kind of like a softball question to ask, was that the right thing to do? But if you think about it a little bit more, maybe it's not so clear. I mean, was it the fair thing to do? Well, she wasn't the legitimate queen and she was made queen, and that's actually kind of definitionally high treason, I suppose. So she was guilty of that. Was it the right thing to do that perhaps it spared endless rebellion after rebellion after rebellion, as the Protestants in the country would have inevitably tried to get her back on the throne? Well, maybe. Did she try her best, this Bloody Mary, to be lenient at first and merciful at first? I suppose she did. I think in a lot of ways, even though we would balk at it at first, you could almost say that it was one of those unfortunate necessary evils that we encounter in life, even if it seems like a bit of a softball at first. In this reading that we have today, and I love the book of Genesis, and I'm going to do a series on the book of Genesis here coming up, Genesis and Jello, Tuesday's coming up. But this final character that we have, this final person, this final piece of the story of everyone that descends down, not only from Adam and Eve, but especially from Abraham, is Joseph here. And everyone remembers Joseph for one reason, because he had a nice, colorful coat. And that's part of the Joseph story. That starts the Joseph story in some ways because that coat was given to him by his father Jacob, otherwise known as Israel. And he gave him that coat because as the youngest child, he just really liked this Joseph. But the thing is, back in that time, they lived by something that the royals would know very well, primogeniture. Who's the most important child in the family? Not just the oldest, the firstborn son. And everyone else is actually just kind of backups. And here comes Joseph, not only receiving this nice fancy coat from his dad, but also telling his siblings about these dreams that he has had. These dreams in which they bow down and serve him, where he becomes the greatest among them, where he is risen to the number one son position somehow, some way. And his brothers don't disregard these dreams. I think, in fact, not just jealousy, but they take the threat very seriously that within their own family, sedition and high treason is brewing. And so they seek to get rid of Joseph. Were they wrong? I don't know. Aside from Bloody Mary and Lady Jane Grey, there's a number of stories from the English throne where people maybe waited around a little bit too long on would-be kings and queens who wound up taking the title in the end. Were they avoiding family calamity? Were they doing what was right? You know, they didn't actually kill Joseph at first. I mean, they left him for dead, sort of, but they sold him. They got him out of the picture, and they continued on because there was a problem that needed to be dealt with, because really Joseph was kind of wrong. At least he was upending the whole system. After the whole of the Joseph experience, from the getting of the coat to the being sold into slavery into Egypt, from being a part of the court and all the way rising up to being this seer and interpreter of dreams, and one of the second most important people in all of the Egyptian empire. Finally, there's a famine up in the land of his father. and his family in the form of his brothers, and it reads as everyone else from the whole tribe, everyone else from the whole people of these Israelites, these sons of Abraham, come down to Egypt to find safety and to find food, and there they find Joseph, the brother that they got rid of because he was a problem. And so they did what they thought was right. And maybe they were. But they find Joseph there, and they assume that Joseph will do what he thinks is right, what they think is the right thing to do. If not kill them, at least turn them into his own personal slaves going their forth. And Joseph's reaction here is surprising, to say the least. He doesn't punish them. He doesn't kill them. He doesn't even make them his servants. He feeds them and their children. And he ascribes to the whole episode some sort of divine hand that was leading it all along. And was he in the place of God to render judgment on them, even if judgment seemed most warranted? It's a strange decision. Actually, it's kind of unfair if you think about it. How do we heal relationships with others? And if you hear last week when I talked about our healing relationship with God, it had something to do with this strange sort of way that we have to accept, if not like, the ways in which God acts in the world that don't always seem fair, that don't always at first glance seem right, that maybe even offend our sense of cosmic justice. Here, Joseph demonstrates that the same way for us to be reconciled to our brothers and sisters and neighbors and fellow companions in this life is through that same sort of choosing from time to time the inequitable way. The way that says, you have wronged me and I'm not going to seek full recompense. The way that says, I forgive you. The way of Christ. Because for as much as we extol the experience of the cross, it is God lowering himself, humbling himself, and giving of himself to a people who were unworthy of that love. Just as Joseph's brothers aren't worthy of his love. Because we can't truly reconcile our relationships with others if our only abiding question that we ask is this completely fair? Is this completely right? By asking that question, we never really get to forgiveness. Not in the truest sense of the word. Sometimes the real necessary evil of it all isn't doing something that's wrong for the right reason. It's that. It's letting go. It's giving away. It's not giving up, but it's working for something that seems beyond our own common sense. Something that can only be demonstrated to us by the saints come before and by our Lord Jesus. Something that is the only thing that can really fix our relationships with others. And something that will sometimes seem unfair. Because it is. But that's how we fix it. Amen.